I was staring at the tow truck driver's face when I realized this whole mess had spiraled completely out of control. And it all started because our HOA president wanted the one parking spot I'd been clearing of snow all winter long. My name is Nichols, and I'd been living in Meadowbrook Commons, a townhouse community in Burlington, Vermont, for 3 years. The development consisted of about 40 units arranged in neat rows, with shared driveways and a complicated parking situation that became absolutely nightmarish during winter months. We had assigned spots, but they weren't covered or heated, which meant that every time it snowed, which was frequently from November through March, someone had to shovel them out. The spot in question was number 17, directly in front of my unit. The thing that made this spot special, and I mean truly valuable during a Vermont winter, was its location. It sat at the end of the row, right next to a sodium vapor street lamp that stayed on all night. The heat from that lamp, minimal as it was, meant that snow and ice melted faster in spot 17 than anywhere else in the complex. I'd noticed this my first winter here, back in 2022, and I'd been meticulous about maintaining it ever since. Every single snowfall, I was out there within an hour, clearing not just my spot, but also the area around it. I'd invested in a good snow blower, proper shovels, ice melt that wouldn't damage the asphalt, and I'd even painted clear lines to mark the boundaries after the original paint wore off. That spot was pristine, always accessible, and it had become a point of pride for me. Then Patricia Hensley became HOA president in January of this year. Patricia was exactly what you'd picture when someone says the words HOA president nightmare. She was 52 years old, had short blonde hair that she kept in that aggressively styled way that somehow looked both curled and straightened simultaneously. And she drove a white Lexus SUV that she obsessively cleaned every weekend. She wore velour tracksuits in pastel colors and always had her phone out, ready to photograph any perceived violation of community standards. Her presidency started innocuously enough. She sent out an email introducing herself, outlining her vision for the community, which included stricter enforcement of existing rules and several new regulations she wanted to implement. Most of us ignored it. HOA presidents came and went, and Meadowbrook Commons had always been pretty relaxed about enforcement. That changed in February. The first Tuesday of February brought a massive snowstorm. Vermont was used to snow, but this was intense even by our standards. Nearly 18 inches fell overnight, and the temperature plummeted to 5 degrees. I woke up at 6 in the morning, looked out my window and saw the familiar white blanket covering everything. I bundled up, grabbed my snow blower, and got to work. By 8 o'clock, I'd cleared my spot, the walkway to my front door, and helped my neighbor, an elderly man named George Patterson, clear his area too. I was heading back inside, looking forward to hot coffee and a warm shower, when I saw Patricia's Lexus crawling down the street. She stopped right in front of my townhouse, and I watched as she took several photos of my parking spot with her phone. That was odd, but I shrugged it off and went inside. The email arrived at 9:15. It was addressed to all residents but was clearly directed at me. "Dear Meadowbrook Commons residents," it began, in that overly formal tone that people use when they want to sound authoritative. "It has come to my attention that certain residents are taking it upon themselves to alter community property without board approval. Specifically, I have observed unauthorized paint markings in parking area 17, as well as excessive use of chemical ice melting agents that may be damaging our asphalt surfaces. Per Section 4.7 of our community bylaws, Any modifications to common areas must be approved in writing by the HOA board. Additionally, Section 8.2 states that the board reserves the right to reassign parking spaces as needed to ensure fair and equitable access for all residents. Please be advised that parking assignments may be subject to review and modification. Thank you for your cooperation. Patricia Hensley, HOA President. I read it 3 times, my coffee getting cold in my hand. The paint I'd used was standard parking lot paint, the exact same yellow as the original markings. The ice melt was specifically labeled as asphalt safe, and parking spots had been assigned based on unit numbers since the development was built in 2019. This wasn't about property damage or fairness. This was about my spot. I decided to respond diplomatically. I sent Patricia a private email explaining that I'd only refreshed the existing markings and that the ice melt was certified safe. I attached photos of the products I'd used, including their safety certifications. I mentioned that I'd been maintaining the spot for 3 years without any issues. Her response came back within 20 minutes. Mr. Nichols, your email has been noted. However, the board has determined that parking space 17 would be better utilized by residents who may have difficulty accessing other areas of the complex during inclement weather. As president, I am exercising my authority under Section 8.2 to reassign parking spaces as follows. Parking space 17 will be assigned to my unit, effective immediately. Your new assigned space will be parking space 31. Please ensure your vehicle is moved by 5 p.m. today to avoid being towed. Patricia Hensley, HOA President. Parking space 31 was at the far end of the complex, nowhere near any helpful street lamp, positioned between 2 large SUVs that made it nearly impossible to navigate, and it had a drainage problem that meant it collected slush and ice melt runoff from the entire row. It was, objectively, the worst parking spot in Meadowbrook Commons. I sat back in my chair, staring at my computer screen. The audacity was breathtaking. She was HOA president, sure, but she couldn't just arbitrarily reassign parking spots for her own benefit. That wasn't how this worked. At least, I didn't think it was how this worked. I pulled up the community bylaws, a 43-page document that I'd skimmed exactly once when I bought my townhouse. Section 8.2, which Patricia kept citing, did say the board could reassign parking as needed to ensure fair and equitable access. But the board consisted of 5 people, not just the president. And there was a whole procedure outlined for how these decisions had to be made, including written notices, opportunities for residents to respond, and a formal vote. Patricia hadn't done any of that. She just decided she wanted my spot and declared it hers. I called George, who'd been in the community since it opened. He answered on the 3rd ring. George, it's Carter from next door. Quick question about the HOA. Can Patricia just reassign parking spots on her own? George chuckled, but it wasn't a happy sound. She's pulling that already. No, she can't. Board has to vote. But here's the thing, Carter. The other 4 board members are all people she handpicked. They don't show up to meetings, they just vote yes on whatever she sends them by email. Happened to Frank Sullivan last month. She decided his shed was 6 inches too close to the property line, had him tear it down and rebuild it. Cost him $4,000. That's insane. That's Patricia. My advice, move your car, fight it through official channels. Request a formal board meeting, get it on record that you object, but don't give her an excuse to tow you because she will absolutely do it. I thanked George and hung up, feeling the familiar burn of injustice in my chest. But he was right. I needed to handle this properly. I spent the rest of the day drafting a formal complaint. I cited specific bylaw sections, referenced the proper procedures that Patricia had ignored, and requested a formal board meeting to discuss the parking reassignment. I made copies of everything, sent it via certified mail to Patricia and the other 4 board members, and documented every step. Then, reluctantly, I moved my truck to spot 31. The next morning, I woke up to find Patricia's pristine white Lexus sitting in my spot. My spot. The space I'd maintained for 3 years. The spot I'd cleared just yesterday. She hadn't even bothered to clear any snow from spot 23, which had been her original assignment. She'd just taken mine. I drove to work seething, my truck struggling to get out of the slush-filled disaster that was spot 31. A week passed. The storm system stalled over Vermont, dumping snow every other day. Each time I'd watch from my window as Patricia parked in spot 17, never once clearing it herself, benefiting entirely from the street lamp's warmth and the foundation I'd built keeping that space maintained all winter. Meanwhile, spot 31 became progressively worse. The drainage issue meant that every thaw created a small pond that then froze solid overnight. I had to keep a bag of kitty litter in my truck just to get enough traction to leave in the mornings. My certified letter requesting a formal board meeting got a response 2 weeks later. Dear Mr. Nichols, your request for a board meeting has been reviewed. The board has determined that the parking reassignment was made in accordance with Section 8.2 and represents a fair distribution of resources. Your request for a meeting is denied. If you wish to appeal this decision, you may submit a written appeal within 30 days, along with a $150 filing fee. Patricia Hensley, HOA President, a filing fee. To appeal an arbitrary decision made by someone who'd violated the very bylaws she claimed to be enforcing. The sheer gall of it was almost impressive. I paid the fee. I wasn't going to let this go. My appeal was 17 pages long. I documented everything. The lack of proper board voting procedures, the absence of written justification for the reassignment, the failure to provide adequate notice, and the clear conflict of interest in Patricia reassigning a space to herself. I included photos of Spot 31's deteriorating condition and Spot 17's maintained status. I cited Vermont property law regarding homeowner associations and their limitations. I submitted it on March 1st, right before another major snowstorm hit. This storm was even worse than February's. 22 inches overnight, with high winds creating massive drifts. The parking lot was completely buried by morning. I looked out my window and saw nothing but unbroken white, with only the tops of cars visible here and there. I got dressed and headed out with my snow blower. Spot 31 was going to take at least 2 hours to clear. The drifts had piled up against the vehicles on either side, and there was so much snow that I'd have to make multiple passes just to cut through it. I'd been working for about 15 minutes when I heard an engine roar to life. I looked up to see Patricia's Lexus backing out of Spot 17. She must have had a remote starter because the vehicle was already warming up. The spot itself had maybe an inch of snow in it, thanks to the street lamp's heat, while everything around it was buried. She rolled down her window as she passed me. "Looks like you've got quite a project there, Carter. Better get to it. Some of us have important places to be." She drove off, and I stood there in the freezing wind, covered in snow, holding a snow blower, and something inside me snapped. I finished clearing Spot 31, but my mind was working the whole time. Patricia had violated multiple bylaws, ignored proper procedures, and was essentially stealing community property for her personal benefit. The appeals process was a joke, clearly designed to rubber stamp whatever she wanted. The other board members were either complicit or completely checked out. I needed a different approach. That evening, I started making calls. I spoke to every resident I could reach, explaining what had happened. Most were sympathetic but resigned. Patricia had been making life difficult for various people since taking office. Mark Donovan in Unit 12 had been fined $800 for leaving his garbage cans visible from the street, even though the community had no dedicated storage areas. Rachel Chen in Unit 7 had been cited for having the wrong shade of white curtains in her front window. Tom and Jennifer Rice in Unit 29 were in a dispute over their mailbox, which Patricia claimed was a quarter-inch shorter than regulation height. Everyone had a story, but nobody had done anything about it. HOA tyranny thrived on apathy and the assumption that fighting wasn't worth the effort. I wasn't apathetic, and I was absolutely willing to put in the effort. The next day was a Saturday. I spent the morning researching Vermont HOA law, specifically looking for precedents involving board overreach. What I found was interesting. Vermont Statute 1126.113 specifically limited HOA authority and required boards to act in good faith and in the best interests of all residents, not individual board members. There was case law supporting challenges to arbitrary board decisions. Even better, Vermont law provided for resident-initiated recall votes of board members who violated bylaws or abused their authority. I started drafting a recall petition. By Sunday evening, I had a document that detailed Patricia's violations, cited relevant bylaws and state statutes, and called for her immediate removal as HOA president pending a community-wide vote. According to our bylaws, I needed signatures from 20% of residents to trigger a recall vote. That meant 8 households. I got 14. Turned out people were more fed up than I'd realized. Once they understood that we could actually do something about Patricia's reign, they were eager to sign on. Even quiet, conflict-averse residents like George and elderly couples who normally avoided drama wanted her gone. I submitted the recall petition on Monday morning via certified mail, with copies going to all board members and our property management company, Green Mountain Property Services. Patricia's response was swift and vindictive. Tuesday afternoon, I received a notice on my door. Violation notice. Unit 17 resident Carter Nichols. Violation. Excessive noise during snow removal activities before 8 a.m. Fine, $200. Second violation. Improper storage of snow removal equipment. Fine, $150. Third violation. Vehicle parked improperly in assigned space, tire over line. Fine, $100. Total due, $450. Payment due within 15 days or additional penalties will apply. Every single violation was fabricated or absurdly petty. I'd used my snow blower at 7:45, which was technically before 8 but barely worth noting. My snow blower was stored in my garage, not visible from anywhere. And the parking violation was laughable. My truck had been perfectly positioned in the center of spot 31, such as it was. This was retaliation, plain and simple. I documented everything with photos, time-stamped and detailed, showing that my equipment was properly stored and my parking was correct. The noise complaint was harder to disprove, but I'd been operating well within normal hours, and plenty of other residents did snow removal before 8 without any issues. I submitted a written response disputing all charges and noting that this appeared to be retaliation for my recall petition. Wednesday brought another massive snowstorm. This was getting ridiculous even for Vermont. The Weather Service was calling it one of the worst winter seasons in 20 years. Snow removal was becoming a full-time job. I was clearing Spot 31 that afternoon when Patricia's Lexus pulled into the complex. She drove straight to Spot 17, which of course had minimal snow, and parked. Then she got out and walked over to where I was working. "Carter, I need to speak with you about your unpaid fines." I kept working, pushing snow away from my truck. I disputed those fines. They're retaliatory and you know it. Disputes must go through the proper appeals process. Until then, the fines stand. If they're not paid by the deadline, I'll have no choice but to place a lien on your property. That made me stop. I turned to face her. A lien over disputed parking violations. The bylaws give the HOA the authority to enforce compliance through any legal means necessary. That includes liens and, if necessary, foreclosure. She wasn't joking. Her face had that serene, satisfied expression of someone who held all the cards and knew it. "You can't be serious." "I'm perfectly serious. You started this, Carter, when you decided to challenge my authority. I tried to handle the parking situation diplomatically, but you chose to be difficult. Now you're facing the consequences of your actions." She paused, then added, "Of course, if you were to withdraw your recall petition and formally apologize for wasting the board's time, I might be willing to reconsider the fines. And who knows, maybe we could discuss getting you a better parking assignment. Not Spot 17, of course, but something more suitable than 31. There it was. She wanted me to back down, to submit, to acknowledge her authority and my place beneath it. This was never about parking or bylaws or community welfare. This was about power and control. "I'm not withdrawing anything," I said. "And I'm not paying fraudulent fines. Do whatever you think you can do, Patricia. I'll see you at the recall vote." Her expression hardened. "You're making a serious mistake." She walked back to her Lexus and drove away, leaving me standing in the snow, my heart pounding with anger and, I'll admit, a touch of anxiety. Could she actually place a lien on my property? Could the HOA foreclose over a few $100s in disputed fines? I called a lawyer that evening. Rebecca Martinez, a real estate attorney in Burlington who'd handled my townhouse closing. I explained the situation and she listened without interrupting. "Okay," she said when I finished. "First, yes, HOAs can place liens and even foreclose, but there's a process, and it requires legitimate debt. Disputed fines don't qualify. If she tries to file a lien, we'll get it removed immediately and possibly countersue for harassment. Second, everything you've described sounds like textbook HOA abuse. The parking reassignment without proper board authorization, the retaliatory fines, the threats, all of it is actionable. Third, your recall petition is valid. She has to honor it. If she tries to block it or manipulate the process, that's another violation. So what should I do? Document everything, which it sounds like you're already doing. Don't pay the fines. Wait for the recall vote, and if she escalates, call me immediately. We can get an injunction against any enforcement actions while the recall is pending." That made me feel better, but it also meant I was now potentially looking at legal fees on top of everything else. This parking spot dispute was getting expensive. The recall vote was scheduled for March 28th, according to the bylaws. That gave Patricia 3 more weeks to make my life miserable, and she absolutely took advantage of the time. Every few days, I'd find a new violation notice on my door. My doormat was the wrong color. My porch light was too bright. I'd left my trash can out 20 minutes past the pickup deadline. Each violation came with a fine ranging from $50 to $200. I disputed every single one, with documentation, photos, and formal written responses. Other residents who'd signed the recall petition started getting similar treatment. Mark Donovan got cited for parking his work van in his assigned spot because it had vinyl lettering advertising his plumbing business, which Patricia claimed violated rules about commercial vehicles. Rachel Chen was told her window curtains still weren't compliant, even though she'd replaced them. Tom and Jennifer Rice were fined for having icicles hanging from their gutters, which Patricia deemed a safety hazard. It was a systematic campaign of harassment, but it had an unintended consequence. The more Patricia retaliated, the angrier residents became, and the more support the recall gained. By mid-March, over half the community was actively opposed to Patricia's presidency. The snow kept coming. Every storm meant I had to dig out Spot 31 while watching Patricia effortlessly use Spot 17. The injustice of it gnawed at me constantly. I'd wake up angry, go to work angry, come home angry. It was affecting my sleep, my mood, my whole quality of life. Then came March 20th, and everything changed. We got another major storm, this one dropping 16 inches overnight with temperatures around zero. I spent the morning clearing Spot 31, which had become an absolutely Herculean task. The drainage issue meant there was a layer of ice beneath all the fresh snow, making it nearly impossible to get proper traction with the snow blower. I was about halfway done when I heard raised voices. I looked up to see Patricia standing in Spot 17, talking on her phone, gesturing angrily at something. Her Lexus was running, warming up, and she seemed agitated. I kept working, trying to ignore her, but the shouting got louder. I caught fragments of her conversation. "I don't care what the weather is like, I need it done today. Yes, today. I'm the HOA president, this is a community matter. Just send a truck." She ended the call and looked directly at me, her expression triumphant. 20 minutes later, a tow truck pulled into the complex. I watched, confused, as the driver parked near the entrance and Patricia walked over to speak with him. They talked for a few minutes, with Patricia pointing repeatedly in my direction. Then the driver nodded and got back in his truck. The tow truck drove slowly through the parking lot, past several vehicles, past Patricia's Lexus, and stopped directly in front of Spot 31, where my truck was parked. The driver got out, clipboard in hand, and walked up to me. "Carter Nichols, that's me. What's this about?" "I've got an authorization from the HOA to tow your vehicle. Says here you're parked in violation of community rules, multiple unpaid fines, and the HOA has authorized removal." I stared at him, then at Patricia, who was standing by her Lexus with her arms crossed, watching. "That's my assigned spot. I'm parked legally, and those fines are disputed." The driver shrugged. "I just go by the paperwork, man. I've got a signed authorization from the HOA president. Unless you can show me something that says otherwise, I have to tow it. Let me get my documents." "Give me 2 minutes." I ran inside, grabbed my laptop and the folder where I'd been keeping all my HOA correspondence, and hurried back out. The driver was already hooking up my truck. "Wait, stop. Look, here's my lease agreement showing I'm assigned to Spot 31. Here's my response disputing all those fines. The HOA president reassigned my original spot to herself without proper authorization. That's what this whole thing is about." The driver looked at the documents, then at his clipboard, then back at me. "Look, I sympathize, but I can't referee HOA disputes. I've got a signed tow authorization. If you think it's wrong, you need to take it up with them. Otherwise, your truck is getting towed to impound and you'll need to pay the fees to get it back." "How much are the fees?" $300 for the tow, $50 a day for storage. Plus you'll need a release from the HOA saying you're cleared to retrieve it." So Patricia was going to cost me at least $300, probably more by the time I got the release sorted out, and leave me without my truck in the middle of a Vermont winter. This was beyond petty. This was genuinely malicious. I was about to argue further when I noticed something. The tow truck had Lakeside Towing printed on the side, with a Burlington phone number. I recognized that name because I'd seen their trucks around town. More importantly, I'd heard my coworker Steve mention that his brother ran a towing company in Burlington. "Hold on 1 second," I told the driver. I pulled out my phone and called Steve. "Steve, quick question. Your brother's towing company, what's it called?" "Lakeside Towing. Why? Is he working today?" "Yeah, he's on dispatch." "Why, what's going on? I need to talk to him." "Can you give me his direct number?" Steve gave me the number and I immediately called it. A man answered on the second ring. "Lakeside Towing, this is Derek." "Derek, my name is Carter Nichols. Your brother Steve works with me. I'm in a situation here where one of your drivers is about to tow my truck based on what I believe is a fraudulent authorization from my HOA president. She's retaliating against me for filing a recall petition. Can you help me out? Let me talk to my driver." I handed my phone to the tow truck driver, who listened for a minute, said, "Yeah," a few times, then handed it back. "Derek wants to talk to you again." "Carter, okay, here's the deal. Without getting in the middle of your HOA drama, I can't just ignore a signed authorization. But what I can do is verify it. Did this HOA president follow proper procedures? Does she have actual authority to order a tow? Because if she's acting on her own without board approval, that's not a valid authorization and I won't complete the tow. She's definitely acting on her own. The board hasn't met or voted on anything in months. She's just been issuing unilateral decisions. You have documentation of that. I have everything documented. Emails, certified letters, the whole paper trail. Send it to me right now. My email is on the website. I'll review it and make a decision. In the meantime, my driver will wait." I thanked him, pulled up Lakeside Towing's website, and started forwarding emails. The recall petition with 14 signatures showing community opposition to Patricia's actions. The parking reassignment email with no board vote mentioned. My appeals and the dismissive responses. The retaliatory violation notices. Everything. 5 minutes later, my phone rang. "Carter, it's Derek. I've reviewed your emails. This HOA president doesn't have valid authority to order this tow. I'm calling it off. My driver will unhook your truck and leave." Relief flooded through me. "Thank you so much. No problem. But heads up, she's probably going to try another towing company. You might want to get ahead of this." That was good advice. I thanked Derek again and hung up. The driver was already unhooking my truck. Patricia had noticed and was marching across the parking lot toward us, her face red even in the cold. "What are you doing? I gave you authorization to tow that vehicle." The driver didn't look at her. "Authorization is invalid. No tow." "Invalid." "I'm the HOA president. I have full authority to enforce community rules." "Not according to your own bylaws, you don't. Sorry, lady. No tow today." The driver got in his truck and drove away, leaving Patricia standing there furious. She turned to me. "You think you're clever? You think this changes anything? I will have your truck towed, Carter, and when I do, it'll cost you a lot more than $300. You tried to have my truck towed on false pretenses," I said, keeping my voice level despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "That's harassment. It's probably illegal, and it's definitely getting added to the recall documentation." "There's not going to be a recall. I'm canceling it." "You can't cancel it. I have more than enough signatures. The bylaws require you to hold the vote." "The bylaws give me discretion to determine whether recall petitions are valid. I've determined yours isn't. The vote is canceled." And with that, she walked back to her Lexus, got in, and drove away. I stood there in the cold, shaking slightly, holding my phone. She just openly stated She was going to ignore the bylaws and cancel a legitimate recall vote. That was a clear violation of Vermont HOA statutes. It was also incredibly stupid because I'd recorded the entire conversation on my phone. I immediately sent the recording to Rebecca Martinez, my lawyer, with a subject line that read "Emergency. HOA president refusing legal recall vote." Rebecca called me back within an hour. "Carter, this is exactly what we needed. She's openly violating state law. I'm drafting an emergency petition for a temporary restraining order and an injunction compelling the HOA to hold the recall vote. We'll file tomorrow morning. In the meantime, do not engage with her further. If she tries to tow your truck again, call the police immediately and report it as harassment. If she sends more violation notices, document them but don't respond. Let me handle this." "What about the recall vote? Can she really just cancel it?" "Absolutely not. Vermont statute is clear on this. Once a valid recall petition is filed, the vote must be held within 45 days. She has no discretion to cancel it. By trying to do so, she's violated state law, and that gives us grounds for immediate legal intervention. This is good for us, Carter. She's finally crossed a line she can't walk back from." That made me feel better, but I was also acutely aware that this whole situation was escalating far beyond a parking dispute. We were now talking about lawyers, court orders, and potential legal action against the HOA. It was necessary, but it was also exhausting. The next morning, Rebecca filed our emergency petition in Vermont's Superior Court, Civil Division in Burlington. The petition detailed Patricia's abuse of authority, the invalid parking reassignment, the retaliatory fines, the attempted illegal tow, and her refusal to honor a legitimate recall petition. We requested a temporary restraining order preventing her from taking any enforcement actions against me or other recall petition signers, and an injunction compelling the HOA to hold the recall vote by April 15th. We got a hearing date for March 26th, just 6 days away. In the meantime, Patricia escalated her campaign. More violation notices appeared on my door daily. I stopped reading them, just photographed each one for evidence and filed them away. Other petition signers reported similar harassment. George got cited for having an unsightly bird feeder in his backyard. Mark Donovan was told his work van violated rules that didn't actually exist. The atmosphere in Meadowbrook Commons became increasingly tense. Then, on March 24th, 2 days before our court hearing, Patricia made her biggest mistake yet. I woke up at 6 in the morning to go to work and looked out my window to check the weather. What I saw made my blood run cold. My truck was gone. Spot 31 was empty, no sign of my vehicle anywhere. I threw on clothes and ran outside, searching the parking lot. Nothing. My truck had been towed during the night. I immediately called the police. A Burlington Police Department cruiser arrived within 20 minutes. Officer David Brennan took my statement while I showed him my documentation proving the truck was legally parked in my assigned spot. "So your HOA president tried to have it towed 2 days ago, that got stopped, and now it's gone?" Officer Brennan asked. "That's right. And I have a recording of her threatening to have it towed." I played the recording for him. He listened, frowning. "Okay, this is complicated because HOAs have certain enforcement authorities, but towing a legally parked vehicle from an owner's assigned spot without proper cause is theft. Let me make some calls and see if I can track down your truck." Officer Brennan spent 15 minutes on his radio and phone. When he came back, his expression was grim. "Your truck is at Granite State Towing in South Burlington. They got a call at 2 in the morning from someone claiming to be the HOA president, saying there was an abandoned vehicle that needed immediate removal. They towed it around 2 in the morning. Patricia called them at 2 in the morning to tow my truck. That's what their dispatch log shows. Here's the thing, Mr. Nichols. This wasn't a legitimate HOA enforcement action. This was done in the middle of the night, probably specifically to avoid having it stopped like the first attempt. That moves it from a civil HOA dispute into potential criminal territory. I'm going to need to speak with your HOA president. Officer Brennan asked for Patricia's address. She lived in Unit 8, just 3 buildings over. We walked there together, and he knocked on her door. Patricia answered wearing a bathrobe, looking confused. "Can I help you?" "Madam, I'm Officer Brennan with Burlington PD. I need to ask you about a vehicle towing that occurred early this morning." Her expression barely changed. "I don't know anything about any towing, Miss Hensley. We have dispatch records showing that someone identifying themselves as the HOA president called Granite State towing at 2 this morning to have a vehicle removed from the Meadowbrook Commons parking lot. Was that you?" "I may have called a towing company. As HOA president, I have the authority to remove vehicles that are in violation of community rules." Officer Brennan's voice remained professionally neutral. What violation was Mr. Nichols's truck committing at 2 in the morning? He has multiple unpaid fines. The HOA has the authority to tow vehicles belonging to residents with outstanding violations. Madam, I've reviewed the documentation. Those fines are disputed, and there's active litigation regarding your authority to have issued them. Additionally, calling for a tow at 2 in the morning to remove a vehicle from its assigned spot raises serious questions about your intent. Were you aware that another towing company refused to complete this same tow 2 days ago because they determined the authorization was invalid? Patricia's face flushed. That driver didn't understand HOA authority. I found a company that would properly follow instructions. Instructions to tow a legally parked vehicle in the middle of the night, Officer Brennan said. Miss Hensley, I'm going to need you to provide a written release for Mr. Nichols to retrieve his vehicle immediately, without any fees. I'm not doing that. He can get his truck when he pays his fines. Madam, if you refuse to provide that release, I'll have to consider this an illegal tow which could result in criminal charges. Vermont law is very specific about vehicle theft and unauthorized towing. Patricia's eyes widened. Theft? I didn't steal anything. I'm enforcing community rules. You had someone's legally parked vehicle removed from its assigned space at 2 in the morning without valid authority. If you genuinely believed you had the right to do that, then provide your documentation right now showing proper board authorization for this enforcement action. Patricia hesitated. The board doesn't need to authorize every single enforcement action. That's why we have a president to handle these matters. You have anything in writing from the board giving you authority to order vehicle tows? Another hesitation. It's implied in my role as president. Officer Brennan sighed. Miss Hensley, here's what's going to happen. You're going to call Granite State Towing right now and authorize the immediate release of Mr. Nichols's vehicle with no fees. If you do that, we can treat this as a civil dispute between you and Mr. Nichols. If you don't, I'm going to treat this as an illegal tow and you'll be facing criminal charges. Your choice. Patricia stared at him, her jaw tight. Finally, she said, Fine, I'll call them. She went inside and came back a few minutes later with a handwritten note. Here, this authorizes release of the vehicle. Officer Brennan examined it, then handed it to me. Mr. Nichols, go get your truck. Miss Hensley, I strongly suggest you stop taking any enforcement actions against Mr. Nichols or any other residents until your court hearing. What you're doing has crossed the line from HOA enforcement into harassment, And if I get called back here again, someone's getting arrested. Are we clear?" Patricia nodded stiffly and went back inside, closing the door harder than necessary. Officer Brennan walked me back to my unit. "Get your truck, document all of this, and make sure your lawyer knows what happened. This woman is out of control." I thanked him and immediately called Rebecca Martinez, even though it was barely 7 in the morning. She answered on the 4th ring, sounding sleepy. "Carter, what's wrong?" I explained what had happened. By the time I finished, she was fully awake and furious. "She had your truck illegally towed at 2 in the morning, after we already filed an emergency petition. Carter, this is perfect. I mean, it's terrible for you, but legally this is exactly what we need. She's demonstrated a clear pattern of harassment and abuse of authority. I'm amending our petition right now to include this incident. Get your truck. Get copies of everything from the towing company, especially their dispatch logs showing the 2 a.m. call, and email it all to me. Our hearing is in 2 days. We're going to bury her." I drove to Granite State, towing in my work colleague's car after explaining the whole mess to him. The towing company was sympathetic once they understood what had happened. The manager printed out copies of their dispatch logs, the initial call recording where Patricia identified herself and claimed the vehicle was abandoned, and the tow authorization form she'd faxed over in the middle of the night. Looking at those documents made the whole thing even more absurd. Patricia had gone out of her way in the middle of the night to orchestrate the towing of my truck just to make my life difficult. The level of vindictiveness was stunning. I got my truck back without paying any fees, thanks to Officer Brennan's intervention, and drove home feeling both relieved and apprehensive about what Patricia might try next. The next day, March 25th, I received a notice that the HOA was scheduling an emergency meeting for that evening to discuss ongoing disruptions to community harmony. The notice was vague, but the intent was clear. Patricia was going to try to use the meeting to discredit me and the recall effort before our court hearing. I called Rebecca. "Can she do this? Can she hold an emergency meeting right before our court date? She can hold whatever meetings she wants, but it won't affect our petition. However, you should attend and record everything. If she says anything that demonstrates further abuse of authority, it'll strengthen our case." That evening, about 20 residents gathered in the community clubhouse for the emergency meeting. Patricia stood at the front of the room, looking composed and professional, with the 4 other board members sitting at a table behind her. I recognized them: Donald Fletcher, Wendy Marshall, Keith Morrison, and Sandra Phelps. All of them were Patricia's appointees, and none of them had attended a meeting or participated in any board activities in months. Patricia called the meeting to order and immediately launched into a prepared speech. "Thank you all for coming on short notice. I've called this emergency meeting to address a serious situation that's been developing in our community. As many of you know, there have been challenges to the board's authority, specifically my authority as president. These challenges have created division and disruption, and I believe it's important to set the record straight." She went on for 10 minutes, presenting a completely distorted version of events. According to her narrative, I was a difficult resident who'd repeatedly violated community rules, refused to pay legitimate fines, and was now trying to undermine the HOA's authority through frivolous legal action. The parking spot reassignment was described as a fair and reasonable decision to help residents with mobility issues, even though Patricia was perfectly healthy and had no mobility problems. The towing attempts were framed as necessary enforcement actions against a scofflaw resident. It was all lies, but it was delivered smoothly and professionally. If I hadn't been living through the actual events, I might have been convinced. When Patricia finished, she opened the floor for discussion. George raised his hand immediately. Patricia, with all due respect, that's not what happened at all. I've been watching this whole situation, and Carter has done nothing wrong. You reassigned his parking spot to yourself without a board vote. You've been issuing retaliatory fines against everyone who signed the recall petition. And you had his truck illegally towed 2 nights ago. This isn't about community rules. This is about you abusing your authority. Several other residents nodded and murmured agreement. Patricia's smile didn't waver. George, I understand you're friends with Carter, but let's stick to facts. The parking reassignment was authorized under Section 8.2 of our bylaws. The fines are for legitimate violations. And the towing was a proper enforcement action. Mark Donovan spoke up. Then why did the first towing company refuse to do it? Why did you have to call another company at 2 in the morning? The first company made an error in judgment. The second company properly understood HOA authority. Or they just took your money without asking questions, Mark shot back. The meeting was deteriorating rapidly. More residents were speaking up, most of them critical of Patricia. I sat quietly, recording everything on my phone as Rebecca had advised. Then Patricia made a tactical error. Frustrated by the pushback, she said, "Look, the bottom line is that I'm the president and the board supports my decisions completely. We've voted on everything I've done, and it's all been properly authorized." Donald Fletcher, one of the board members sitting behind her, looked confused. "Patricia, we haven't voted on anything in weeks. You've been sending emails, but there haven't been any actual votes." Patricia's face went rigid. "Donald, we can discuss board procedures later." "No, I think we should discuss it now," Donald said, standing up. "You've been using the board as a rubber stamp, making decisions and then claiming we approved them. I've gone along with it because I assumed you knew what you were doing, but this has gotten out of hand. I didn't approve towing Carter's truck. I didn't approve all these retaliatory fines. And I certainly didn't approve canceling a legitimate recall vote." Wendy Marshall, another board member, nodded. "I've been uncomfortable with this for a while too. Patricia, you've been acting unilaterally and just assuming we support you." Patricia looked stunned. Her carefully constructed narrative was falling apart in real time. Keith Morrison, the third board member, stood up. "I'm done with this. Patricia, you don't have board support for what you've been doing. I'm voting right now to reverse the parking space reassignment. Carter's original spot, number 17, should be returned to him immediately." "All in favor?" Donald, Wendy, and Sandra all raised their hands. Only Patricia kept hers down. "Motion carries 4-1, Keith said. "Carter, spot 17 is yours again as of right now." The room erupted in applause. Patricia's face had gone from red to pale. She gathered her papers with shaking hands and walked out of the meeting without another word. I sat there, slightly stunned. I'd gotten my parking spot back. The board had publicly repudiated Patricia's actions. This was a huge victory, but I also knew it wasn't over. We still had the court hearing tomorrow, and Patricia had demonstrated repeatedly that she wouldn't accept defeat gracefully. The next morning, March 26th, Rebecca and I met at the Chittenden County Superior Court in Burlington. We were there for the emergency hearing on our petition for a temporary restraining order and injunction. Patricia arrived with her own lawyer, a stern-looking man in his 60s named Gerald Blackstone. He had the air of someone who'd represented plenty of HOAs and knew exactly how to defend their overreach. Judge Helen Crawford presided. She was in her 50s, with gray hair and sharp eyes that suggested she didn't tolerate nonsense. Rebecca presented our case methodically, walking through the timeline of events. Patricia's violations of bylaws and state statute, the retaliatory fines, the illegal towing attempts, and her refusal to honor the recall petition. We submitted all our documentation. The emails, the recorded conversations, the police report from the illegal towing incident, and the dispatch logs showing Patricia's 2 a.m. call to the towing company. Gerald Blackstone tried to argue that Patricia had been acting within her authority as HOA president, but Judge Crawford cut him off. "Counsel, I've reviewed the petition and the supporting documents. Your client reassigned a parking space to herself without a board vote, issued hundreds of dollars in apparently retaliatory fines, attempted to have the petitioner's vehicle illegally towed twice, and then refused to honor a valid recall petition. Can you explain to me how any of that is consistent with the authority granted to an HOA president under Vermont law?" Blackstone hesitated. "Your Honor, HOA governance can be complex, and presidents often need to make quick decisions without convening the full board." "I'm not talking about quick decisions. I'm talking about self-dealing and retaliation. Did your client reassign a parking space to herself?" "The space was reassigned based on its accessibility features." "So yes, she reassigned it to herself. Was there a board vote?" "Not a formal vote, but the board was informed." "Mr. Blackstone, Vermont statute requires HOA boards to act collectively, not through unilateral presidential action, especially when the president directly benefits. The parking reassignment alone is problematic, but combined with the subsequent retaliation against Mr. Nichols and other residents who signed the recall petition, this court has serious concerns about your client's conduct." Judge Crawford looked at Patricia directly. "Miss Hensley, did you call a towing company at 2 in the morning to have Mr. Nichols's vehicle removed from his assigned parking space?" Patricia stood. "Yes, Your Honor, but it was a legitimate enforcement action." "At 2 in the morning. After another towing company had already refused to complete the same tow. I needed a company that understood HOA authority. Or a company that wouldn't ask too many questions," Judge Crawford said dryly. "Miss Hensley, your conduct as described in this petition appears to be a textbook example of HOA abuse. You've used your position to benefit yourself personally. You've retaliated against residents who challenged you, and you've attempted to block a legitimate recall process." The judge looked at both lawyers. "Here's my ruling. I'm granting the temporary restraining order. Miss Hensley is prohibited from taking any enforcement actions against Mr. Nichols or any other resident who signed the recall petition. She is prohibited from issuing fines, ordering tows, or threatening any punitive measures pending resolution of this matter. Additionally, I'm ordering the Meadowbrook Commons HOA to conduct the recall vote by April 15th, as required by statute. The vote will be administered by a neutral third party to ensure fairness. Finally, I'm ordering Miss Hensley to personally reimburse Mr. Nichols for any costs he incurred related to the illegal towing, including legal fees. This order is effective immediately." Rebecca and I walked out of the courthouse an hour later with a signed court order. We'd won, completely and decisively. Patricia was restrained from any further retaliation, the recall vote was guaranteed, and I was going to be reimbursed for my expenses. "How much do you think this cost her?" I asked Rebecca as we stood on the courthouse steps. "Between her lawyer's fees and your reimbursement, probably $5,000, maybe more. Plus, she's now on record as having abused her authority, which means if she does anything else, she'll be in contempt of court. She's done, Carter. Even if she somehow survives the recall vote, which I doubt, she has no power left." That night, I moved my truck back to spot 17. It felt absurdly satisfying to park in that space again, the one I'd maintained all winter, the one Patricia had tried so hard to steal. I stood there for a moment, looking at my truck under the street lamp, and felt a profound sense of justice. The recall vote was held on April 10th, 5 days earlier than the court-mandated deadline. A neutral administrator from Green Mountain Property Services oversaw the process. Every household got a ballot, voting was by secret ballot, and the results were tallied publicly. Patricia Hensley was recalled as HOA president by a vote of 32-6. It wasn't even close. The board immediately elected Donald Fletcher as interim president. His first action was to officially restore my parking space assignment in writing. His second action was to void all the retaliatory fines Patricia had issued, not just against me but against everyone else she'd targeted. His third action was to formally reprimand Patricia and remove her from the board entirely, citing her violations of bylaws and state statutes. Patricia didn't attend the meeting where these actions were taken. In fact, she stopped participating in community activities entirely. I'd see her occasionally, coming and going from her unit, but she never spoke to anyone and kept her head down. The Lexus that she'd parked in my spot for weeks was suddenly always parked in front of her own unit, spot 8. A few weeks later, in early May, a "for sale" sign appeared in front of Patricia's townhouse. She was moving out, presumably unable to face the community after her spectacular fall from grace. George knocked on my door one evening with a bottle of bourbon. "Thought we should celebrate your victory properly." We sat on my porch, looking out at the parking lot, and he poured 2 generous glasses. "You know what the funny thing is," George said. "Patricia could have avoided all of this if she'd just been reasonable. If she'd asked nicely about the parking spot, explained why she wanted it, maybe offered to trade spots legitimately, you probably would have worked something out." He was right. I wasn't an unreasonable person. If Patricia had approached the situation with basic respect and honesty, we could have found a solution. But she'd chosen intimidation and abuse of authority instead, and it had cost her everything. "People like Patricia," George continued, "they get a little bit of power, and they think it makes them invincible. They forget that power in a community association only exists as long as the community allows it. The moment residents decide they've had enough, that power evaporates." We finished our drinks and talked about other things, normal neighborhood stuff, and I realized that Meadowbrook Commons felt different now. Lighter, somehow. The tension that had been building all winter was gone. People were friendlier, more relaxed. The community was healing. My last interaction with Patricia came in late May, right before she moved out. I was clearing some spring debris from my porch when she walked by carrying a box to her car. She stopped and looked at me for a long moment. "I hope you're happy," she said. Her voice was tired, defeated. "I'm not happy you had to leave," I replied honestly. "I just wanted to park in my assigned spot and live my life. That spot should have been mine. It was better, more convenient. I deserved it as HOA president. But it wasn't yours, Patricia. And being president didn't give you the right to just take it." She shook her head. "You don't understand what it's like trying to keep a community like this running smoothly. Everyone complains, nobody follows the rules, and then when someone tries to enforce standards, they get attacked for it. There's a difference between enforcing standards and abusing authority. You cross that line." She didn't respond, just turned and walked back to her townhouse. I never saw her again after that day. Patricia's unit eventually sold in July. A young couple with a baby moved in. Nice people who didn't seem interested in HOA politics at all. Spot 8, Patricia's old assigned space, was right in front of their unit, and they were perfectly happy with it. Donald Fletcher turned out to be an excellent HOA president. He ran meetings efficiently, communicated clearly with residents, and most importantly, he understood that his role was to serve the community, not to rule over it. Under his leadership, the board revised the bylaws to include better checks and balances on presidential authority, clearer procedures for enforcement actions, and stronger protections for residents against retaliation. Life returned to normal at Meadowbrook Commons. I kept maintaining Spot 17, clearing it after every snowfall, keeping it in perfect condition. Other residents started taking similar pride in their spaces, and the whole parking lot looked better for it. The legal costs were significant, about $3,000 total, but Patricia reimbursed all of it as ordered by the court. Rebecca Martinez helped me file a formal complaint against Patricia with the Vermont Attorney General's Office for HOA abuse, though I never followed up to see what came of it. I'd gotten what I wanted, my parking spot back, the fines voided, and Patricia removed from power. Looking back on the whole experience now, months later, I'm struck by how a dispute over something as mundane as a parking spot spiraled into legal action, police involvement, and the recall of an HOA president. But that's what happens when someone in authority decides to abuse their power for personal benefit. Small injustices, left unchallenged, grow into larger ones. I learned a lot through this ordeal. I learned the importance of documentation, the value of knowing your rights, and the necessity of standing up to bullies even when it's difficult and expensive. I also learned that most people, given the choice between supporting abuse of authority and supporting fairness, will choose fairness. The residents of Meadowbrook Commons proved that when they overwhelmingly voted to recall Patricia. As for the tow truck that solved my problem, in a way, it was Patricia's failed towing attempts that really sealed her fate. If she'd stopped after the first attempt was blocked, if she'd accepted that defeat and backed down, she might have survived as president. But calling a towing company at 2 in the morning, having my truck illegally removed, drawing police attention and judicial scrutiny, that was the action that made her conduct undeniable. She couldn't spin that as legitimate HOA enforcement. It was obviously vindictive, obviously harassment, and it gave us the concrete evidence we needed to take legal action. Sometimes the things people do to hurt you end up being the very things that defeat them. Winter came around again the following year, and the first major snowfall hit in late November. I was out early with my snow blower, clearing Spot 17, when Donald Fletcher walked by on his way to his own car. "Morning, Carter. Looks like you're keeping that spot in perfect shape as always." "That's the plan," I said, grinning. "You know, Patricia's old unit sold, but I heard she moved to Florida. Apparently she joined an HOA board down there." I laughed. "God help those poor people. Well, at least they're far away from us." "Hey, the board was thinking about installing heated parking spots next year, maybe start with a few priority spaces. Would you be interested in helping evaluate options?" "Absolutely. That would be great for everyone here." Donald headed to his car, and I went back to clearing snow. Spot 17 gleamed under the street lamp, perfectly maintained, exactly as it should be. My spot, earned and defended where it belonged. The whole experience taught me that homeowner associations, like any organization with power over people's lives, require constant vigilance. They can be forces for good, maintaining communities and protecting property values, but they can also become vehicles for petty tyrants who get drunk on minor authority. The difference comes down to accountability and the willingness of residents to push back when things go wrong. I hope my story helps someone else out there dealing with HOA abuse. Document everything. Know your rights under state law. Don't be afraid to get lawyers or police involved when necessary. And remember that recall provisions exist for a reason. HOA boards work for the residents, not the other way around. When someone forgets that basic truth, it's up to the community to remind them. And sometimes, just sometimes, the solution to your problem really does involve a tow truck, just not in the way anyone expected. Patricia wanted to use a tow truck to hurt me, to punish me for challenging her authority. Instead, her illegal towing attempts became the evidence that brought her down. There's a certain poetic justice in that. As I finished clearing the last of the snow from spot 17 that November morning, I reflected on how much had changed in the past year. The parking space that had caused so much conflict was just a parking space again, nothing more and nothing less. The community was peaceful. The board was functional, and I could park my truck without worrying about retaliatory fines or midnight towing attempts. Sometimes standing up for yourself, even over something as simple as a parking spot, is worth every bit of effort it takes. Not because the parking spot itself is that important, but because principles matter. Fairness matters, and refusing to let bullies win matters. I put away my snow blower, brushed the snow off my jacket, and headed inside for coffee. Through my window, I could see spot 17, clear and ready exactly as it should be. My spot. Hard won, rightfully mine and finally at peace.